We have 5 speakers, and we'll quickly move through the agenda. There will be time at the end for Q&A. We hope it'll be about 15, 20 minutes. And the proceedings of today's presentation, as well as the video, will be available on the BBG website in a few days' time. So you don't really have to take notes if you don't want to. We are pleased to be partnered with the Broadcasting Board of Governors as we continue our monthly series on topical research findings from various markets around the world. This effort is in support of BBG's mission to inform, engage, and connect people around the world in support of freedom and democracy. Today, we will take a look at findings from Russia. It's only appropriate given that Russia is going to be in the media spotlight over the next 2 weeks. These findings include data from the Gallup World Poll, as well as Broadcasting Board of Governors' quantitative and qualitative research. I'm told we'll be fortunate enough to have with us later this morning a board member from the Broadcasting Board of Governors. The Broadcasting Board of Governors is both the name of the independent federal agency that oversees all US civilian international media and the name of the board that governs those broadcasts. And the board is composed of 9 members with expertise in the fields of mass communication, broadcast media, or international affairs. 8 members are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The 9th, the Secretary of State, serves as ex officio. I would introduce the person as soon as they join. I'm going to move on to introducing our Bruce Sherman, the Director of Office of Strategy and Development, Broadcasting Board of Governors. Bruce Sherman is responsible for global strategy and research for the Broadcasting Board of Governors. He joined the BBG in 1996 after 12 years at Radio Marti, the broadcasting service for Cuba, including 5 years as the station's deputy director in charge of all daily operations. Mr. Sherman directs formulation and execution of BBG strategy, leading a team of senior managers and planners across broadcast groups. He has overseen development of the 3 5-year strategic plans, including the most recent 2012 to 2016, and is their principal author. Mr. Sherman also has played a central role in launching new strategic initiatives for the Muslim world, including Radio Sawa and Al-Hurra TV for the Middle East, and Radio Fada for Iran. These and other strategic initiatives since 2002 have expanded the BBG's worldwide audience from 100 million to over 185 million people weekly. He built and also directs the BBG's global media research program with quantitative and qualitative studies in over 70 countries and an annual budget of $10 million. The program is one of the most comprehensive media research efforts in the world. Mr. Sherman holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Florida and a master's degree in liberal arts from St. John's College. I'd like to invite Mr. Bruce Sherman to the podium.
Thank you, Rajesh, and welcome everyone. I'm going to be very brief because we want to get into the presentation. Just to mention the support the BBG provides for this series and the importance of this to us in making available to a wider audience than just the community of broadcasters within the BBG key data on media environments around the world. These series focus not on BBG performance, but they focus on the environments in which we operate. Our intention here is to sketch the media scene, the media environment today in Russia, so that you, members of the public, both here and then those who tune in via the web, can get a sense of the world that we operate in and the media environments that we're competing in. That's the purpose of the series. We, as a taxpayer-funded institution, believe it's important to provide this information to the public. So we're very happy to do this series. Just a quick note on the presentation today. It's in 3 parts. The first part of the presentation is attitudinal information that comes from the Gallup World Poll. While we are focused primarily on the media environment in Russia in this briefing, we do think it's important to take stock of the broader political context, so you'll see a little bit of attitudinal information at the top. Then we have a rich section of media information that we'll be walking you through. And then towards the end, something that we've been developing in these presentations as this series has evolved, we're going to step back a little bit and take a look at a particular challenge for any organization that seeks to communicate with Russian audiences, and that is the circumstance of the web, the digital space inside Russia, and the inherent challenges that are in that space for international media organizations. So again, it's a three-part presentation. I welcome all of you. We encourage you to ask questions during the Q&A. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Bruce. Let me introduce the first speaker of this morning, Nelly Esipova. Nelly Esipova is the Director of Research for Global Migration and Regional Director for Gallup's World Poll for former Soviet Union countries. She has led Gallup's groundbreaking research on global migration patterns while also managing more than 100 studies on various topics in former Soviet Union countries. Ms. Esipova frequently presents insights from her research to international audiences. She has presented at numerous migration, well-being, positive psychology, and leadership conferences. Government officials often call on Ms. Esipova's extensive knowledge of former Soviet Union countries and survey methodological experience. She has repeatedly provided consulting to the World Economic Forum on survey implementation. Her present and past clients include the World Bank, IOM, OECD, World Economic Forum, BBG, Office of International and Refugee Health, Belgian contact point to the European Migration Network, and the IRS. Ms. Esipova is the co-author of more than 70 published articles. She has had several articles related to CIS region published in the Harvard International Review, including Conflict in the Caucasus, Russian Muslims, Questions of Freedom, The Decisive Factor, Post-Soviet States' Attitudes Towards NATO, and Inside Turkmenistan, A Glimpse at the Central Asian Country. As a Director of Global Migration Research, Nelly also has published in IOM Migration Research Series, Migration Letters, and she led the team that wrote the main chapter of IOM 2013 Annual World Migration Report. The second speaker of the day is going to be Scott Michael, Research Analyst, International Broadcasting Bureau of Office of Research, Broadcasting Board of Governors. Scott Michael is a research analyst in the International Broadcasting Bureau, Office of Research at the Broadcasting Board of Governors, where he designs, analyzes, and reports on a variety of quantitative and qualitative research projects for the BBG, Voice of America, and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. His main regional focuses are Eurasia, the Near East, and Lusophone Africa. He previously worked on projects in East Asia and West Africa and continues to do a number of cross-regional analysis in media and opinion, as well as collaborating on methodological issues and questionnaire design. From 1989 to 97, Mr. Michael worked on audience research at the Office of Cuba Broadcasting and was chief of his Office of Program Evaluation from 93 to 97. His work on Cuba included quantitative and qualitative projects among Cuban immigrants and visitors to South Florida and various Latin American countries, as well as regular expert panel studies of programming. In June 97, he began his current work in the newly formed IBB Office of Research. Mr. Michael completed his undergraduate studies at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and his graduate studies in political science at Yale University, living for 18 months in Chile, where he designed and conducted an elite survey on politics during the military rule. Our third speaker is Mr. Paul Tibbets. Paul Tibbets is the Director of Market Insight and Evaluation at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, where he oversees research into current and new RFE-RL projects on multiple media platforms, including radio, television, and online. He works closely with RFE-RL broadcast services on all aspects of audience research work and implementation of the results. As Deputy Director of Audience Research and Program Evaluation from 2002 to 2006, Tibbets traveled to much of the broadcast region and worked closely with RFE-RL's strategic research partners. His extensive knowledge of the priorities, platforms, and the media environments in which RFE-RL operates serve the organization well as it seeks to retain and expand audiences for its varied offerings. Prior to joining RFE-RL in 2002, he was the project manager, CIS, Caucasus, and Baltics at the Intermedia Survey Institute in Washington, D.C. While at Intermedia, Mr. Tibbets managed a variety of quantitative and qualitative research projects in the Baltic states and the CIS on behalf of international broadcasters. And from 1997 to 2001, Mr. Tibbets was an economist at Plan Econ, focused on Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. He managed the East European Automotive Service in conjunction with Standard & Poor's DRI, and was the editor of the quarterly East European Automotive Monitor. Mr. Tibbet studied in the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He received his MA in '98, his BA in Russian and Russian Studies from St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota in 1995. At this point, as we have a guest joining us, I would like to introduce him as well. Mr. Michael P. Meehan, after 23 years of work in the US Congress, congressional and presidential campaigns, Mr. Meehan, for the past 6 years, has built a successful communication strategy and public relations firm, Venn Squad Communications. As president and CEO, Mr. Meehan's firm provides strategic communications for dozens of Fortune 500 companies, foundations, trade associations, and political and issue campaigns. On Capitol Hill, Mr. Meehan has served in senior roles for US Senators John Kerry, Barbara Boxer, Maria Cantwell, former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, Congressman Vic Fazio, and John Oliver. Mr. Meehan serves as a member of the Advisory Committee and the Special Committee on the Future of Shortwave Broadcasting with the Broadcasting Board of Governors. Thank you very much in inviting Mr. Meehan, as well as all of our speakers. Please join in extending a warm welcome to him. Let me invite our first speaker, Ms. Nelly Esipova.
Good morning. I will talk about results of Gallup World Poll. So first few words about what Gallup does in Russia. So it's a part of our worldwide study. You can hear me? Starting from 2006, every year we collect data in Russia. We do national representative study of adults 15 years and older. And in two years, 2010, 2012, we actually did 2 data collections. It's nationally representative study of about 120 million of Russian adults. Russia is a very challenging country. It's the largest country in the world, so we have to spend a lot of time traveling through the country, and winter is not nice to us, so we avoid winter data collection. Usually we collect data in spring, summer. And in 2013, we had 6% of adult population excluded from the survey for 3 main reasons. First one is political instability. As you can imagine, Chechen Republic, Dagestan were excluded because of crime level, high crime level, and we didn't want to risk interviewers' lives. North Ossetia. And the last reason is, which always exists, is remote areas where we have trouble even finding transportation. A good example of it would be Chukotsk region. Our usual sample size is 2,000 in every wave. We use a face-to-face modality because phone coverage is not good enough yet in Russia. And survey is almost an hour long. And we usually don't have any problems with the survey because World Poll survey has a lot of different topics. So we are switching from topic to topic, and it's easier to keep respondents engaged. We don't need to get government permission to conduct survey in Russia, although there is not a very pleasant development in the last couple years. Starting from 2012, interviewers started to report us that more and more people are afraid to express their political views. So I want to give you a quick overview of public sentiments on political measures, which will give you some understanding of what's going on in Russia. So first, let's talk about Comrade Putin. So we started to ask about the following question. Do you approve or disapprove of the way Vladimir Putin is handling his job as president or prime minister? So in 2008, our first measurement, it was still at the time when he was president. Then, as you can imagine, we switched asking about his job performance as prime minister, and then back to president. Overall, I want to say that Since Soviet Union time, Russia got used to command and control system. So Russia is always look up for a strong leader, and people obviously view Putin as a strong leader. But you can see that there is quite a dramatic decrease of his approval rate. This can be explained by several reasons. First of all, which actually was surprise personally to me, is that despite of the fact that from here it looked like it's obvious, then when Putin became prime minister, that he'll just wait and come back as a president. But for some reason, people were really sincerely surprised, even intelligentsia, and it created, starting from 2011, you see the biggest drop started there when Putin announced, that he will run for president again. Another reason is probably that opposition became more active, and it brings more and more awareness about how much power is accumulated in one hand, basically. Some events, of course, like Pussy Riot, for example. And overall, economic situation in the country is not great. And we believe that all these components play a role in these results. What also interesting about it is that we did not see any difference by demographics, by age, gender, education, rural, urban. It looks like it's common view of everybody. Similarly, when we ask about the following question, is the Russian leadership taking the country in the right or wrong direction? You see that when we compare 2008 and 2013 data, 5 years difference, that there is a big decrease in people perceptions that, Russian leaders take it to the right direction. So in 2008, 63% believed that Russia goes in the right direction. Now 45, 18% decrease. And wrong direction, 14% increase. Another question we ask is the following. Some people think that democracy is important for development of a country. Other people think that democracy is not important for the development of the country. What is your opinion? In 2008, we will keep comparing 2008 and 2013, 60%, which is already majority of the country, believes that it's important. And what we see in 2013, it's even more, 73% believe democracy is important. And it's not just young people. While young people behave as we expected, when we look at a group of youngest people in our survey, 15 to 24, 77% of them support the fact that democracy is important. But even 55 plus and 55 and older, 66% of them believe democracy is important. So another question we ask, which we find very telling, is which political system is most suitable for Russia? And when we look at results, we understand that what Russians mean by democracy might be quite different from what all of us here think democracy is. So you see that 18% in both years, 2008, 2013, believes that the more suitable political system for Russia is Western-style democracy. But there are 37%, third group of columns, believe that the best political system is Soviet system, but more democratic and marketplace. And what's even more telling is even among young people, 15 to 24, who didn't grow up in Soviet Union time, every fourth of them, 25%, that's what they want, okay? And 8% now, 10% in 2008, so almost every 10th person wants to have strong authoritarian regime, so back to idea of demand and control. How satisfied are you with the way democracy works in this country? That's another question we ask every year. So we, from here, can think that there is no democracy there, but this is how government often positions themselves. So it's still a legitimate question for Russians. So we see that just a few people are satisfied. 3% are very satisfied, and 16% are somewhat satisfied with the way democracy works in the country. How important is for Russia to have active opposition? This question now in 2013 is definitely more timely even than in 2008. Few reasons for this. First, Putin is tightening regime, get more and more control. And at the same time, opposition become more and more active, especially in big cities. So, and there are more supporters of opposition. In 2008, I could not even imagine what I've seen in 2012, 2013, when with minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, thousands of people go outside to support opposition. When I was afraid even to get out from the hotel, I have to tell you. And in September last year, you probably read that Navalny was sentenced in Kyiv for case of corruption. And at that time, I was also in Russia, and the whole center was blocked. All metro stations were closed because, again, thousands of people went to support opposition. So knowing all this, it's not surprising that actually majority of people believe that media in Russia does not have a lot of freedom. The numbers you see now, it's percentage for improve. So in 2010, it was 42% of people said that agree that there is freedom of media. And then you see slight increase by 2013 to 48%. What's interesting is that 2010, it was a year when Dozhd was introduced. It's a channel probably most progressive and liberal and with high quality of content and production was introduced. And this increase can be explained by basically new presence of several, just few, but several media outlets which show some liberal data. But at the same time, you see that Russia ranked 176 out of 196 countries for press freedom. And to give you some point of reference of our data, you see we have 48% approval in 2013. At the same time, in the United States, it's 87, almost double. And Russia is in one line with Moldova, Ukraine. It's a little bit better than Belarus. But some of you probably follow the news, what happened just in the last few days. Basically, Dozhd, the media outlet which I just mentioned, was taken off the air by major cable providers. So it's a very, very bad news. So needless to say, there are a lot of roadblocks for media broadcasters working in Russia. So and now I would like to invite my colleague Scott Mitchell, who will talk about our media environment survey. Thank you.
Morning. Last year, the BBG commissioned for the second time Gallup to conduct a nationally representative survey of Russian adults, 15 or older, focused on evolving use of media, in particular media to get news and information, as well as opinions about the news they get. Variations of the main questions in this survey have been fielded annually for well over a decade, and quite similar versions for the last 5 years. Interviews in the most recent survey were done in November of last year, and the sample covered about 95% of the adult population, or 120 million adults. Sorry, didn't have that there. Looking at home access to media, television is almost universally available in Russia, and access to mobile phones is not far behind, at more than 9 in 10 adults owning one. About half of Russian adults say they have a radio in their homes, a level that's been stable since 2010. Both computers and internet access are available in 7 of 10 Russian adults' homes, and internet access grew by 7 percentage points between 2012 and 2013. A significant pace, but slower than increases from 24% in 2008 to 63% in 2012. As we can see in the next slide, there are gaps between urban and rural areas and across income groups in both internet access and in high-speed internet access. Home internet access of some kind is much higher, at 76% in urban areas, than it is in rural areas, and at 57%. But since 2010, it's important to note that the growth in home access has been greater in 130% in rural areas than it has in urban areas, at 60% over that time period. Home access also rises with income. 9 in 10 of those who say their current household income allows them to live comfortably, is the way we ask this question. Twice as many as those who find it very difficult to get by. Only 45% of them have home access. It also rises with education, from 48% of those with primary or less to 89% of those with university degrees. And also, as an aside from the chart here, home access is fairly uniform across regions of the country, with Moscow and St. Petersburg at the high end, close to 90%, and South and Volga regions at the low end at about 60%. Use of features like video and graphics, of course, depend on speed of access. About 4 in 10 of all adults reported they had high-speed internet access at home. That's 56% of those with home access. In the 2010 survey, just under 2 in 10 adults reported broadband access at home. Even more so than home access in general, access to high-speed internet skews toward those in urban areas and those who report living comfortably on their current income. Urban adults are almost 3 times as likely as rural respondents to report high-speed access at home. Again, high-speed access has more than tripled since 2010 in rural areas and doubled in urban areas. As an aside again, those best off in terms of income are over 3 times more likely than those worst off to have fast internet at home. Moving to daily use of major mass media platforms as measured by reported use the day prior to the interview. Used daily by over 8 in 10 adults, TV is clearly the dominant medium, although internet is catching up, with daily use by almost half of Russian adults, which is up by almost 60% since 2010. Overall daily use of TV is actually now a few percentage points lower than it was when measured in 2010. Daily radio use has been kept fairly stable since 2010 at about just over 1 in 4 adults listening every day. Looking at age differences in daily media use. Daily internet shows on the middle group of bars, shows the most stark variation by age, with more than 8 in 10 of those 15 to 24 going online every day, and dropping increasingly with each older age group to just over 1 in 10 of those 55 and older. While about 3/4 or more of all age groups watch TV daily, everyday TV viewing increases with age, as almost 20%, with almost 20 percentage points separating the youngest and oldest age groups in terms of the number that watch daily. Among those under 35, daily TV use has fallen 8 to 10 percentage points since 2010, and it's been stable among those 35 and up since that time. It's important to note that on a daily basis, more 15 to 24-year-olds go online daily than watch TV. Daily use of radio is fairly balanced by age on the right-hand group of bars, with about 3 in 10 of those 25 or older listening, and about 1 in 5 of the youngest group listening daily. Daily TV use shows little significant variation by education level. It's actually a few percentage points lower among those with the post-secondary education than among those with secondary or less. Daily use of internet and radio rises with education. Internet rises more sharply with post-secondary education, this middle group of bars, from a bit over a third of those with secondary or less to almost 2/3 of those with complete undergraduate or graduate degrees. Daily use of radio rises less sharply overall, but more consistently, from 1 in 5 of those with primary or lower to more than 1 in 3 of those with complete university or graduate degrees. Let's look now at some of the ways that Russians are accessing and using media. Recent events show that no means of delivering content is immune to arbitrary use or threats of use of state power to deny media access, mass access to alternative domestic and international sources. Nonetheless, certain means of delivering content continue to offer more choice and variety to Russians. About half of Russian adults still depend on traditional terrestrial antennae for TV, but their use has dropped since 2010. About a third report using cable service, which is up a bit from 2010. 1 in 5 adults report getting TV via household satellite dish, nearly double the 1 in 10 who had satellite service in 2010. Although it's important to note that almost all of the satellite packages that people have link them in a fixed way to a particular satellite and package, which theoretically is under the control, subject to influence of the state. 6% of adults report getting video for the television set by an internet connection directly to the television or through another device that's connected to the television. This is up from 2% in 2012 and doesn't reflect the additional use of computers, tablets, and mobile devices for consumption of TV content. January 2014 report from the Russian IKS media consultancy indicates that throughout 2013, cable subscriptions showed no growth, while direct-to-home satellite subscriptions were up 20%, and IPTV subscriptions were up 25%. Looking at use of delivery means by urban, rural areas and income, it's clear that population density and the economics of TV distribution mean that in urban areas, almost half of adults get TV by cable versus 1 in 10 by satellite dish, while in rural areas it reverses, with 4 in 10 having satellite dishes and only 1 in 10 using cable. Satellite DTH connections are actually somewhat more common among people who find it difficult or very difficult to get by on their income. And this is perhaps in part due to the existence of free or very low-cost packages, satellite packages, that are available and attract to those who have poor terrestrial or cable options. Again, an aside from the chart, looking at some of the attitudes toward Russian media and international media, satellite TV doesn't appear to be related either to negative views of Russian news media's comprehensiveness or positive views of international media's accuracy, or to very frequent news use. So this doesn't appear to be a great driver of satellite adoption. Looking at ways of listening to radio, FM is the most popular band used, with 39% of adults, 80% of radio listeners using it weekly. But looking on the chart here at specific ways radio listening that are currently open to international broadcasters who are virtually denied access to domestic rebroadcasting. About 1 in 10 adults listen weekly to radio on internet, and a similar number listen on medium wave. Weekly use of shortwave is lower, at about 1 in 30 adults using the waveband weekly to listen to radio, a level that's varied very little in the last 7 years. It is interesting, again, looking at these media attitudes, that adults who agree that international media offer accurate coverage are slightly more likely than those who disagree to listen to radio via internet or a satellite receiver. And those who agree that Russian media don't offer enough variety in perspectives also are a bit more likely to listen weekly online. Looking at how people are using on a weekly basis the internet, half of adults report using social networks in the past week, followed closely by searching for particular topics, information, questions. Almost 4 in 10 say they used email and got news online last week. And just fewer than 1 in 3 watched video online, and 1 in 4 listened to audio of any kind. Almost 1 in 4 read a blog or shared photos, and 1 in 10 use podcasts or posted to a blog. Again, age shows the most significant differences here across the different activities, with the youngest on average, the 14 to 24-year-olds, on average 10 times as likely as the oldest to do each of the activities, especially the less common ones like podcasts, blog posting, and sharing video. And they're 5 to 8 more times more likely to use social networks, email, and get news. Differences between men and women as far as their online activities are small. Men on average are about 10% more likely than women to report any of them. Women are only 4% less likely than men to use social networks and are about 10% more likely to share videos and photos online. Looking at mobile phones and how people are using them on a weekly basis, 9 in 10 adults personally use a mobile. 27% of all adults report having a smartphone. Informa Telecoms projects that 48% of mobile lines will be 3G or 4G by next year, by 2015, and 75% by 2018. Since a smartphone is sometimes a hard thing for us to define anywhere, plus the context of a survey, all mobile owners were asked about advanced features that they can use on their phones or have used on their phones. So almost 1 in 4 adults and 27% of mobile users said they accessed the internet in the past week using their mobile. And more than 1 in 10 adults used a mobile app, as did those who downloaded and watched a video in the past week. 7% reported they'd ever used a mobile app for news on their. Again, age is the primary driver here, or the primary correlate of smartphone use. Younger Russians are leading in pretty much all the ways here. The younger they are, the more likely they are to use a mobile with advanced features. Personal smartphone use was reported by 6 in 10 Russians in the youngest demographic, 15 and 24, and mobile access by 64%, which, if you're reading carefully, you'll note that it's actually higher than the number who used a smartphone, so that there are some people that have internet on their mobile but didn't actually call it a smartphone. About a third of this youngest age group had watched a video or used an app on their mobile. Among those 25 to 34, the next highest age group, the number reporting these activities was 60 to 70% lower than the youngest age group, and we see similar declines among the other age cohorts. Smartphone use is a third higher among males than females. Use of video and mobile apps is about 50% higher among males. Smartphone and mobile internet past week use is reported by 22 to 26% of people across different age groups, except slightly higher among those who are university graduates. Looking specifically at daily use of media for news, the graph here shows obviously the overall sets of bars ranked by the prevalence of their use, daily use for news, and then within each set, the top bar to the bottom bar showing the trend from 2013 to 2010. Almost all daily users of TV in general, internet and radio, also say they use the medium daily for news. Daily use of TV for news is marginally up since 2010. Internet for news is up over 90% since 2010, and radio for news is up almost 20%. Friends and Family, as a daily news source, is down several percentage points since 2012, but is much higher than it was in 2010, and is still outpacing all but TV as a source. Just fewer than 1 in 5 adults each day use both social networks and SMS messages for news, but social networks as a news source are up between the last 2 surveys, and SMS is down. Daily use of print media is up by half since 2012, although part of the variation here may be that the previous survey was done in June and this one was done in November, different times of year. And about almost 1 in 10 people use mobile apps daily for news. Age, again, is key in the daily use of digital media for news. Here presenting internet, social media, and mobile apps for daily use for news. Well, as you'll see in a moment, younger adults in Russia are much less likely to express high interest in a variety of news topics. They are by far the most likely to report daily use of internet, social media, and mobile apps for news. Half of those 35 to 44 use internet daily for news. 6 in 10 of those 25 to 34, 8 in 10 of those 15 to 24. And almost half of the youngest group, the under 25s, use social media daily for news. About 1 in 5 use mobile apps daily to get news. Daily use of social media and mobile apps for news is much more even across educational levels, with those with post-secondary education more likely, and those who with complete university education much more likely to use internet daily for news than those with secondary or less. And reported use of news, social media and mobile apps for news is relatively more even, as you can see in the last set of bars here on the right, relatively more even across educational groups than the others. Again, Moscow and St. Petersburg stand out for online news gathering, with 6 in 10 using internet news for each day. And the gender gap for daily digital news is lowest for social media, with men only 13% more likely than women to report daily use of that medium for news. Moving on to a set of interest in news topics. Interest in news on different areas of the world is unsurprisingly Russia-centric. News about Russia draws the highest interest from almost 9 in 10, with those split evenly between those who are somewhat interested and those who are very interested. 2/3 of adults show some interest in international perspectives on events in Russia, though only about 1/4 of those show high interest, say they're very interested. News about the former Soviet Union draws interest from just over 6 in 10, and strong interest from about 1 in 5 adults, followed very closely by news about Europe. Although strong interest in Europe news drops to 14%. Half or just over half of adults show interest in the rest of the world, the US, the Middle East, although only 13% of each of those categories show strong interest. High interest in news also rises with age, with those 55 and up, on average 85% more likely to say they're very interested in topics than are those 15 to 24. And news about the USA shows the least variation, interestingly, among high interest by age, with those 55 and older about 25% more likely than those 15 to 24 to be very interested in events here. Looking quickly at accessing and sharing news, 4 in 10 Russian adults access news twice or more daily, and almost as many look for news once a day, the next lowest category here. Just fewer than 4 in 10 adults discuss or share news daily with family or friends, and almost 1/3 of those who share news weekly use social networks services to do so. Looking at very frequent, more than daily, more than twice or more daily, for accessing news, it's similar across all demographics except for the youngest and the oldest. It's essentially looking at sex, at education, and at income. It's fairly even, but you can see that the youngest group stands out with just about a little over 1/4 using getting news more than twice a day, and about 60% of those in the oldest age group. And there's also slightly higher frequent usage of news for those in rural areas. BBG and other international broadcasters, of course, have seen their Russian services as in large part designed to address a lack of comprehensive and objective news, as well as different perspectives that is seen in the Russian media. In our media surveys, we've tried to measure Russian adults' opinions on the information and perspectives that the mass media, their mass media provide, and on the accuracy of news from international media. Respondents are offered 2 statements on Russian and 1 on international media, and asked for their agreement or disagreement. The most often reported, or second most often reported category is in the middle, I neither agree nor disagree, and about from 9 to 15% say they don't know or refuse to answer. But looking at those agreeing and disagreeing, more adults agree than disagree that Russian media do not offer enough variety and perspectives on events and news. That's 30% feel they don't. Opinions shift, however, on whether Russian media provide all the information they need about current events, with over 1/3 saying they agree their media do provide the news they need, and under 1/4 saying they don't, disagreeing. Less than 2% of adults express negative views about their country's media on both the lack of comprehensiveness, all 3 questions, the lack of comprehensiveness of Russian media, and the lack of variety of views, and on the trustworthiness of international news. But larger groups, about 1 in 10 are critical of Russian media on both dimensions, and then also there's a big overlap between, relatively big overlap between those who feel that Russian media lack comprehensiveness and variety, the two of them. Better educated Russian adults have more negative views of Russian media and more positive views of international media. The better educated are twice as likely to have, as the least well educated, to be critical of Russian media for not offering enough information and for insufficient variety in perspectives. Those with complete higher education are slightly more likely to express trust in international media, 31% of them, versus those with less education, about a quarter. Young Russian adults are more trusting of international news media. Almost a third of 15 to 24-year-olds agree that international media provide accurate coverage, versus a quarter of those 45 and older. In summary, Russian media markets present a number of serious challenges and some windows of opportunity. As we've seen with the tightened control of the state news agency, RIA Novosti, under the new International Information Agency Russia Today, the government pressures on cable providers to drop Dozhd, as Nelly mentioned, and increased use of extrajudicial restrictions and blocking of some Russian internet sites. Russian leadership continues to pursue what Ortung and Walker, which you may have read about in the Washington Post or today in Moscow Times, in a journal article in Journal of Democracy, have called selective censorship to achieve effective media control. Nonetheless, some windows do remain for alternative and international media to reach and engage Russian adults. In November 2013, leading independent outlets, Echo Moskvy Radio and TV Dozhd, were reaching, respectively, about 6% and 4% of adults weekly, in both cases higher than it was measured in 2012. BBC's English-language CableSat news channel, its placement of Russian-language news reports on Dozhd and on RBC TV, and a top 25 news website allowed it to reach about 6% of Russian adults weekly. Golos Ameriki VOA Russian news reports on Dozhd and on RBC, and growing reach online and on radio for VOA and for Radio Svoboda, brought U.S. international media weekly reach overall to almost 3%. Despite these achievements, using these windows of TV, particularly the TV windows to Russian audiences, means that they're constrained to avoid politically provocative content and remain at risk from government pressure on partner stations and cable or satellite providers. Negligible access to domestic rebroadcasting puts a ceiling on international radio reach, and political risks remain for domestic radio stations. The relative freedom of digital media also brings a crowded market. ComScore's desktop internet ratings tracked almost 600 top-level market news information properties in December. The youngest adults, who are the biggest users of digital media, are in some ways the least interested in traditional news, and leveraging social media remains a challenge for many news providers. Paul Tibbets of RFERL is going to next discuss some of the ways international media are working to address these challenges.
Okay, good morning to Washington from Prague. We're going to shift gears, as Scott mentioned, and talk a little bit about some qualitative research that we conducted on behalf of RFERL with Gallup in July of 2013. I want to acknowledge the work of my colleague Sarah Glaisel, who's with you there in Washington, both on this project in particular and on putting the slides together today. Sarah will be with you after the presentation if anybody has more questions about the presentation or the research that we did more generally. All of the participants in the research were recruited for their active use of the internet to gather news and information. They did not necessarily have any sort of relationship with international broadcasting. We wanted to know what we needed to do to make our products more successful with this key target group. The Qualitative Project consisted of 3 different elements. You've got it up there on the screen. We did 4 focus group discussions with active internet users in St. Petersburg and Moscow. We had another 4 discussions in Moscow with mid-level employees of the digital space in Moscow. And we also did 5 interviews with experts on the Russian online space in Moscow. So we'll go to some of the results. On to the next slide, please. So in terms of the focus on the web, RFERL in Russia is best known as a radio broadcaster, as Radio Svoboda. As the authorities increasingly eliminated opportunities for us to have local broadcasting in Russia, including the loss of a dedicated AM frequency in late 2012, we started shifting resources from the radio online. You can see on the graph there, shortwave usage for the last several years has remained stable, while more and more Russians are going online. We continue to have a stable, dedicated audience to our radio broadcasting on shortwave, but for us, a successful digital strategy is key to engaging with younger audiences and expanding our impact in Russia. As internet use has spread more widely throughout Russia, users' expectations of the internet and websites have changed as well. Russian internet consumers are looking for a multimedia online experience targeted to them and available at their convenience. It's very similar to the way that we tend to use the internet in the West. So the next slide. So in terms of one of the key issues that we discussed with the participants in the work was looking at what topics a news source might be able to add. One of the things that participants in all of the discussions indicated was that there are topics where independent media can add value because they can talk about things that state-run media either cannot or is not willing to discuss, such as the environment, corruption, human rights issues. One of the challenges, though, is that the participants were looking for this analysis to come from people who were well-known. The people doing the analysis needed to be well-known personalities. In the discussions we had with media professionals, one suggestion for international broadcasters that emerged was that there was an interest in providing outside views on events inside Russia. They felt that there was a curiosity in society about how the rest of the world sees events happening in Russia. And for this, they thought that international broadcasters were uniquely positioned to be providing this sort of coverage. Next slide. One of the aspects that we're working with is looking at how we can use our radio content more effectively online. While listening to the radio online is not a terribly popular habit in Russia, as we see in the survey results shown on the slide, the results from the online survey did show that a large percentage of internet users consume audio content online. Most users are not, however, interested in long programs, and podcasts are generally an unfamiliar concept, but we did see interest expressed in short audio clips that could help illustrate a web story. The challenge is to take traditional radio content and learn how to best repackage it in a way that will be consumed easily online. We just fielded a small piece of follow-up research that explored usage and placement of audio on our Russian service website to see if our practices are in line with user expectations. Next slide. So one of the niches that came out during the course of the research is that objectivity seems to be disappearing in the Russian media space. Many of the experts that we spoke to indicated that impartial and objective journalism was being squeezed out of the Russian media market as individual media outlets grow increasingly strident in expressing their point of view. During the focus group discussions, there was a call for media to report on events as they actually had happened. There were a number of participants in the work in Moscow who said, I watched the report on the protest that night on TV, but it wasn't accurately reflecting what I had seen with my own eyes. It can be lonely for a media organization to be in the middle, but is there a competitive niche available to a journalistic organization that provides verified information and fact-based reporting? Next slide. So for us, there's some questions that still are unresolved in the research that we're thinking about moving forward. Russia is home to a crowded and competitive media landscape, particularly online. The online space is largely free, although we see pressure being exerted in different ways at different times. Finding a competitive niche within the digital space is challenging. Users expect websites to have a clear purpose. Numerous participants repeated during the course of the research that websites needed to have a face. There needed to be clear communication of the core goals of that website or media operation. At the same time, we saw some of the experts expressing a concern that individual brands are less relevant today in the Russian internet space as people increasingly reach content through links on social networks like Facebook or the Russian equivalent Vkontakte, or news aggregators like the Russian portal Yandex. In response, some websites have chosen chosen to target very specific groups online. Lenta.ru, who's one of the most well-established news websites in Russia, has recently moved forward with 2 projects, one that focuses on people interested in documentary films, and another microsite on people who are aviation fans. International media in Russia are often still branded as Cold War enemy voices, and their loyalty to Russia is questioned since they are funded from abroad. How do we best position ourselves today in the digital space with a clear brand proposition that's relevant for today's Russia? This is what some of the things that we're still working on, and this is a little bit more in terms of background based on the qualitative research we did to flesh out some of the survey results. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, Scott, and Nellie. I'd like to ask Mr. Meehan to say a few words about what we have heard so far before we open up for questions.
Good morning. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I just wanted to say a few words. I appreciate all the hard work that everybody's put into this data, and those of us that are on the board that are wrestling with exactly the way both presentations took us to a point of where are we and the challenges that we face dealing with a difficult spot. It reminds me there's an ad on that has a John F. Kennedy quote from 50 years ago that says, "We are not here to curse the darkness, but to light a candle that guides us through the darkness to a safe and secure future." That's a 55-year-old quote, but I think it still applies to where we face the situation in Russia today. And on the eve of the Olympics, when the rest of the world is all looking and gathering upon Russia, it's fitting that we're here today to consume this information and to think about how we best, as broadcasters in this space, use the taxpayers' dollars to provide the type of information that Russians aren't receiving. Last May, I had the privilege of spending the Russian Orthodox Easter with Kevin Close, the RFERL president, and my colleague Susan McHugh for 5 days over in Moscow. I'd never been before, and we visited with a lot of the people who are holding up a small candle in Moscow today, the leaders of this open civil society and democracy efforts there. And it's very moving and compelling to be with these people who live under these threats from the Russian government to get information out to folks in a very challenging environment. I came away very impressed. I had a chance to meet with Ambassador McFaul, who was under siege himself there at the time we were there, and has now been given a chance to come back home to California, and talk with them about the things that we should be doing as broadcasters in Russia, given the serious curtailment and limits of information, as we've discussed so far with the FM radio there. We've lost that license, and we've really had to pursue one of the few avenues left to us is the internet space. I am heartened. I got on the board in 2010, and the internet work was pretty much one of the few paths that we have. And I'm heartened by the work that our journalists from VOA and RFERL, Radio Liberty, are doing in a tough spot. They're in a tough spot, and it brings it home every day, the hard work that we have to do. But they're making some great strides there. I mean, they're breaking some news. The news that our reporters on the ground there are gathering aren't being reported by the state-run Russian media or others. And I find it heartening, and I think that those of us on the board and those of us that work at the back end of the house here have a responsibility to do the best we can to help them. And this kind of information and this kind of discussion really helps inform that, because it's not an easy answer, and we need the thoughts of everybody here in the room and those in the sound of my voice and those who read this information to all pull together. So I want to just thank everybody for being here this morning. I look forward to hearing some questions and participating in any dialogue that folks are interested in. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. We have we have just a few more minutes before we wrap up the session. We have microphones around. Anybody who wants to, please raise your hands. We would approach you with a microphone. State your name, your affiliation before you ask the question.
Good morning. Nina Japeridze, a professor at George Washington University. I have a question for Scott. Really enjoyed your presentation. You showed a slide titled Views of Russian International Media, how citizens of Russia view and evaluate quality of reporting of international versus local media. And the only data that you presented was from 2013. Do you have any trend for that specific?
I didn't analyze it particularly for this presentation. I believe the numbers have
gone up? Is trust in local media increasing or decreasing? It would be really interesting.
How large, how much? I mean, basically, you still have a large problem, and a lot of people are saying they neither agree nor disagree, and or refusing to answer, which is important, and that there could be that they do have views but don't want to share them. So you have to kind of tread carefully with it. But there has been, I think, some increase. But the numbers are kind of relatively small. So.
I think there's a question over here.
Richard White's Hudson Institute. A question about, you talked a lot about and it was helpful, the difference between urban and rural and so on. Did you do any other regional variations? You know, South, East, Republic. I mean, what influence does the Republican authorities have on media coverage?
There are lots. I gave you quite a few, so I kind of pruned it. In general, of course, on a number of behaviors or access, Moscow and St. Petersburg stand out. The thing that struck me was that there was, on the one hand, so at least in like the whole Northwest region, for instance, or in the center region, there were also, the numbers there have kind of caught up in many ways with those. I mean, also some behaviors you see relatively isolated areas, like the Far East, end up high on internet access, high-speed access, and I mean, the one logical assumption is there that stuck in the middle of nowhere, you're all the more interested in getting it. But I mean, the general trend has been, I think, that the other urban areas are catching up with Moscow and St. Petersburg on many, many behaviors, and so are rural areas, in part because of the relative ease. Once you've got the internet, you don't have to worry about different packages and cable providers, and it gives you a more freedom, and it's quicker to get that wide range of information.
We have just time for one more question, one last question. I'm sure the speakers would be sticking around to answer any additional questions after. I want to be, in the interest of making sure everybody leaves this place on time, we just have one more question, please.
Thank you for so much data and so much coverage about the media market in Russia. One element that I was interested in and it didn't come up is in the declining use of radio. I always felt that the car radio was essential to reach influentials. That particular subtopic didn't enter into any of your slides, so I ask you now, do you consider that relevant? Is the board going to put money into radio to reach the influentials in one form or another? And what's the future of that?
Of people that report not having a radio at home, about 14% of them say they have a car radio, and a similar, relatively small percentage say they have.
With all those traffic jams, only 14%.
No, that's it. There are people who do have a radio at home, but also have one in their car. I'll hand it over. It's a large number. The big issue, though, is how do you get on it? Do people's car radios have shortwave? And that kind of thing. So if you're looking basically at an FM kind of environment, the problem is that FM was one of the first dominoes to fall as far as getting, I mean, RFERL did a lot of hard work reformatting and made successful partnerships with fitting the formats and needs of FM stations in various parts of the country, and that's gone. So I mean, that's the basic problem with it is not so much that it's not an important way of listening to radio. Certainly a lot of people here mostly listen to radio in the car. And it's just the issue of access to get to the FM frequencies or even local AM frequencies that people most likely would be listening to.
Right, so they kicked out all the international broadcasters on October 1st, so that's where our FM signal went away. VOA has a very small AM signal in Moscow, but I'm not a technical expert, but I think I could throw a rock further than the signal can go. So we do have a small footprint there. I don't disagree with you about the radios, but it's sort of hard to go back to the Russian government and say you can't have foreign ownership of radios when that's exactly the law here in the United States. You can't have a majority foreign ownership of radio signals here. So, I mean, they geniusly boxed us in on something to take more control over of the radio. So, that's what I was saying about the board trying to figure out where to put resources in where we're going to have the best chance for penetration. And shortwave radio over the largest landmass country in the world, it doesn't seem to make much economic sense in the land of diminished budgets, even though it might be a highly effective medium if you were able to do it. We would still like to do it. I mean, we're pursuing, satellite television options, but those are expensive, and you need some more help on that. So, I mean, this kind of data shows that the internet's a place where we got to put some pressure up. We have a very loyal following of Radio Liberty, and we noticed that when we had our management challenges there, and we lost the radio for a period of time, and folks started looking for us on the internet. So we certainly think that the audio component of this is important. This data is encouraging that people do listen to some of the audio on the internet, but yeah, the car radio is going to be a very difficult thing for us to challenge. This gentleman has a question there. Yeah. I'm happy to stay and answer questions for a little bit. I know other people may have to leave, but I don't want to leave if there's someone who has a question. So.
Mitchell Pullman, public diplomacy and communications consultant. Do you have any indication at all to what extent when people are surfing the net, they are looking for a variety of viewpoints, or are they mostly surfing for websites that already confirm their point of view? Have you done any research on that at all?
We did do a little bit of that in the past in terms of trying to understand how much the preaching to the choir aspect was there in terms of people looking just to be confirmed. I think what we've seen is not necessarily a move to one ideological spectrum or the other, but it's just this passive news collection that happens in terms of seeing the news appear in your news feed, which may be filtered in terms of recommendations from a friend. It's, if my friend likes this article, then I think I'll be interested in it as well. And it has that sort of verification from a friend, or it's on the big news portal like Yandex. I go to check my email and there's the news headlines there and I pick up on what I need. We haven't seen quite as much with the ideological issue.
Although, and I'm Sarah Glaisel from RFE, I work together with Paul. One of the experts that we talked to when we did this qualitative work with media experts in Moscow talked about, and there was a quote up there about the polarization of Russian media, in that much like what we're seeing in the US with Fox News on one side, other media outlets that are maybe on the other side, and the reason that they're doing this is that they think that they can get, people are either going to go to what they really agree with, or they're going to go to what makes them angry, that they really don't agree with. So that's why he thinks that there's going to be a continuation of this, that yes, people, as Paul was talking about, kind of passively get other things, but when they're actually going to go to a brand, which people, outlets are trying to save brand loyalty, grow brand loyalty in an environment where it's going away, they are going to a brand that they either really agree with or really don't agree with.
Rajesh, just to add a point to answer the question, what is the way in to reaching Russian audiences if you're outside the country? The International Broadcasting Organization, of course, like the BBG, while it is absolutely true that we were shut down on local FMs and local television more than a half dozen years ago, all throughout Russia, where we enjoyed very sizable audiences. And as Scott had noted, we had reformatted programming at RFURL under Tom Dine's leadership and at Voice of America, specifically for those FM affiliate stations. We have, just in the last year, been able to secure new partnerships with Russian television. Irina Van Dusen, who has the Russian service at the Voice of America, is here with us, and Eliz Biberai, who heads the Eurasia division at VOA, manage that operation. And of course, we work on the business side of the house and the affiliate side to secure new partnerships. We have them now with the Russian business channel, with REN TV, Dosh TV. So we have been able to make some small inroads over the last year in securing distribution of our content over television and internet TV, but Russian Business Channel is regular TV in Russia. And that's a very significant development because you can see from the data the prominence still of television and the prominence of television as a source of news for people in the country. One data point that I would highlight that Michael touched on is that we've seen in the last couple of years a doubling in satellite dish ownership. It used to be fairly conventional wisdom that satellite was not the way in, and still, you have to be on a bouquet that people have access to. It's not just if you put something up, you're immediately going to be received in 20% of Russian households. But nonetheless, it is an opportunity now that wasn't present some years ago. And so from the perspective of international broadcasters, we're looking at satellite television. Obviously, the web, as Paul Tibbets illustrated, these new partnerships for television placement, and anything else we can possibly do in what, as you've seen here, is a very tight, very restricted media market for international media.
With that, I'd like to thank the speakers for their contribution, the audience for your interest and interesting questions. I'd like to remind everybody that our next event is on March 13th, and the topic of discussion there would be Egypt. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.